Welcome to the Explosive Streak Podcast with Jared Bidne. On today's episode, I'm going to go through and answer some questions through Instagram, and me and Ben Baggett are going to talk about strength training and conjugate training as it relates to baseball. And so I want to clarify and clear up some things versus conjugate training, linear versus linear periodization or Western periodization, so that people can understand what we really do here. And that's one of the hardest things to explain, and I know everything's very confusing as far as conjugate training. West Side kind of brought conjugate training to the US. So we're going to start off this episode with this question. This question comes from Zach Goodman. Hey Jared, I've been listening to your podcast and heard you say a couple times that your athletes squat and bench 3 times a week. You utilize conjugate method, which is traditionally a 2 times per week for each maximum effort and dynamic effort being one of these sessions in each. Do you utilize max effort or dynamic effort more than once a week, or do you use the repetition method, the third day of squatting, benching, or the dynamic and max effort? Thanks. Well, the conjugate system or conjugate method is not necessarily a 2 times per week dynamic effort and a 2 times per week maximum effort. That's how Louis uses the conjugate system to help him out with his powerlifters at Westside. Conjugate training is utilizing the repeated effort method, the maximum effort method, and the dynamic effort method in order to raise levels of strength up at the same time. Now, and it don't have to be a max effort dedicated day to max effort and a dedicated day to a dynamic effort, when we could do maximum effort and dynamic effort in the same day. You got to think, the higher quality the athlete, the more variation in the training they need. It's not, and the lower quality athletes like what you have in the gym. I'm dealing with middle schoolers, high schoolers, and sometimes the collegiate athletes. Now the collegiate athletes, their training may be varied a little differently than what the middle schoolers and high schoolers are. But you got to also think that a lot of stuff that we read and go over is that the athletes are trained at a younger age than what's written about in most books. And so they can adapt to the stress and the stimulus a lot quicker than the older, more seasoned people. So squatting does not necessarily have to be done like Westside does it, like 1 maximum effort, 1 dynamic effort for squat, 1 maximum effort, and dynamic effort for bench. The thing about the athletes is we do squat 3 days a week. We try to get them to squat 3 days a week. Squatting for a young athlete is a skill, and once, like if you heard me talk on the other podcast, once you reach that one thing, once your squat gets to a certain level, then you can vary the squat up all the time. You only have these athletes probably 3-4 years if you're lucky, and so if you're trying to raise their hurdle jumps up, their dumbbell jumps up, or you're trying to get to the 40-inch vertical, or whatever it may be that you're trying to go to, if you dilute it with too many different exercises, then you will never reach your goal because you only have a short road before their road ends before you get those results. So what I'm trying to say is the most important thing for jumping ability is to get to that 40-inch vertical, because once you get that 40-inch vertical, you're not going to really lose the 40 inches, because if you've heard me on the other podcast, I've had people that have not done anything in 3 years and they jumped the 38-inch vertical before and they come back 3 years later and done nothing athletically, and they still jump a 35 and a half is actually what was jumped. And so once you reach that, then you can vary off to more jumps, because if you're still jumping, you're not really going to lose your 40-inch vertical. Now I had a guy come visit me that had jumped a 40-inch vertical a couple weeks ago, and he'd been at home doing dynamic effort for his squats instead of we do dumbbell jumps for our dynamic effort work. We don't do speed squats. We don't spend time or waste time doing speed squats, because speed squats, the only reason that Westside does speed squats is to work on the rate of force development before the squat suit ends or quits working with their squat. So if you have a squat suit on, the further you go down in the squat, the tighter and tighter and tighter that suit gets, which helps spring you up out of the bottom. Now, you have to develop so much momentum before that squat suit quits working, before that load hits. So that's why bands and chains are used to help them boom, get out of the bottom of the hole quick and accelerate quick, because once that squat suit quits working, if they have not accelerated enough, they will miss the lift. So dynamic effort work does not increase strength. It only increases rate of force development. So for my athletes, we need to squat all the time so that that number one thing, which is strength, keeps and continues to increase. Now, if we're skipping a day and instead of using the repeat effort method or the brief maximum tension method on our squats, we're using a dynamic effort day on the squats, and we're spending time squatting in the rack, we're actually squatting, but we're actually not getting better, because the dynamic effort method does not increase strength. And like a lot of these high school coaches, they'll utilize the dynamic effort method at school for power cleans, but they prescribe the wrong sets and reps. And so they're not getting the benefit of the power clean at school, plus they're not even really getting in a triple extension. And so that's frustrating. So dynamic effort rep method should use 1 to 2 max effort speed movements. It's not maximum effort slow, it's maximum effort fast, which is called speed strength instead of strength speed. Now we squat for strength speed. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. Like I said, conjugate training is raising different strength levels up at the same time. And what we're taught in school and what is still being taught at a lot of these universities is just general linear periodization, which is called Western periodization. It's a process through which the athlete's training is systematically organized in order to promote a peak condition close to competition. And the bad thing about that is you go through different phases. You may have a hypertrophy phase. You go through a basic strength phase. You go through a strength and power phase. Then you go through your peaking phase, getting you ready for a season. But the bad thing about that is peak performance can be maintained for only 2 to 3 weeks at a time. So after you leave your hypertrophy phase, you're already starting to lose some of the hypertrophy or the muscular growth that you reached from that phase. So by the time you go from hypertrophy to basic strength, now you're down to strength and power, you're losing some of the basic strength levels that you've gained. By the time you get to your peaking phase, you've now lost basic strength and hypertrophy to a certain degree. But with conjugated training, if you do the training right, you can keep some hypertrophy, you can keep some basic strength, you can have your strength and power, and you're ready for peak competition all the time. That's what Louis talks about. They're ready to go to war right now all the time. If you want a competition, we'll go to the gym, we'll compete right now, and they'll kick your ass, because they're not sacrificing different phases for other phases. And so that's what conjugate training does, is it increases all different strength levels at the same time systematically throughout the year, instead of having one time to where you're getting peak condition. It's kind of like going and climbing a mountain. You don't want to get halfway up that mountain and go down and start over again on these other different phases. Then it's going to take you 10 times longer to get to the top. So Zach, I know that's a long rant on that, so hopefully I answered your question. Let's see what else we have here. Am I selling the book eventually? See, hey Jared, I'm a strength coach from Long Island. I think your approach is awesome, and I'm in completely agreement with your emphasis on strength to weight ratio. Have you found that correlation between strength / weight and speed decreases after a certain level of strength, or does it seem to pretty much be consistent over time, no matter how strong the athlete gets? I think the main thing to consider is that relative strength level. If an athlete goes from 240 to 250, but the relative strength of, as far as let's just use the squat, if that decreases, if he's at 1.8, then he drops down to 1.6, he will be slower. So I think if he continues to get to a certain level, then he's fine. But as far as increasing strength over time, it's kind of like with the athletes, is risk to reward ratio. So you don't want to, like once I get this one athlete to he's moving 1.8 meters per second at times his body weight, at 1.8 times his body weight at 6 meters per second. So once I get him there, we don't have to continually squat, because like I said about the jump situation, once I reach the 40-inch vertical, there's no sense in chasing that. There's other characteristics of jumps that I need. So once I have the one thing, then I can bounce back and work on my repeated jumps. I can work on jumps from different heights, landing and catching myself at different things. But if I do all that before I get to the 40-inch vertical, I mean, jumping over a 30-inch hurdle when you only have a 30-inch hurdle, that's going to be a bitch. So the best thing to do is increase your maximum power output jump height with the 40-inch vertical, and then work on different variations of the vertical, which brings me back to that kid that was only doing speed squats. And how the hell I got on that rant for that is that he quit jumping. Jumping's more dynamic than speed squatting. And so he came back in the gym after about 3 months of not being here, and he's been working at home on speed squats himself. He couldn't get higher than a 36-inch vertical. So that means that the speed squats are actually detrimental to his vertical jump. So he was not like the other people that maintained it. So I don't know exactly how many sets and reps and how he was actually prescribing his speed squats. I don't think he's got a tendo, so I don't know if he was in the right range for developing that dynamic effort with the squat. But if you have chains, or if you don't have anything, subconsciously you're going to slow the bar down before lockout. And if you don't have anybody watching you or maintaining your squat speed, you're going to lose some of the effects. So I think it's just better to use the brief maximum tension method and the maximum effort method. And we use the brief maximum tension method because it's a sub method of the max effort method, and that with younger athletes, they're not primed for maximum 1 rep maxes all the time, because it's either they get it or they don't. There's no kind of grind phase, so you're not really breaking down where the weaknesses are in the lift in order to increase the weak points. So if we're doing 3 to 5 reps or 1 to 3s, which we don't do 1s unless it's for a kid's ego, just because they want to feel like they're getting better, we mainly stick to 3s and 5s, and that lets me know. And it's the same thing about the maximum effort method. What it lets people know, what it lets Louis know when you got 700-800 pound benchers, where the weak points are, so that after they bench, then they go address and work on their weaknesses. Now the same thing for the young kids in here, and most of the time, 99% of the time, it's going to be their damn triceps. So we'll go from bench, we may do another variation of a bench in the same day, then we'll go work our triceps, and we do a lot of triceps, and the kids bitch about it, but that's okay, because their bench goes up. But the thing about the maximum effort method I want to drive home, it brings about weaknesses. The repeated effort method brings about those strengths and those weaknesses in accessory exercises. And the dynamic effort, which we're going to get into Ben, we're going to figure out how to apply the dynamic effort method into throwing and sport recreation. So if your strength goes up to a point, then you can switch and be more variant in your exercises. Okay, hey Jared, I'm a field athlete in a non-contact sport, ultimate. I'm following a program that is catered for our sport, but really love to put some focus on directly improving my vertical. I've recently gained some mass along with strength, but do not know if there's a net gain while still maintaining some of the mass. Do I do any online programming? I get that question a lot. Maybe if I keep getting hammered, I may limit it to a certain number of people. Or do I offer an option to look at programming to look for any shortcomings? I don't like it when people have a program designed for their sport. I think the sport should always be integrated into the program instead of not the program for the sport, because we all need a lot of the same things, and sometimes people get into or caught up into being sport specific when the only thing sport specific is the sport itself. Now there are things and movements within the sport, but the muscle only knows how to move the limb. They don't know dynamic correspondence or anything like that. So the biggest thing to do is work on your rate of force development and increase your maximum strength. And I think a lot of people, and having shortcomings and stuff has to do with a lot of people don't even know where their strengths or the weaknesses are, or they're not even measuring their speeds as they're doing it. So that's kind of really hard to get through unless I kind of see you. So hopefully that helps. This comes from Conjugate Lab. Hey, I listened to all your podcasts. You mentioned you train pro day guys and combine guys. We got a couple pro day guys, and I'm just wondering if you taper your guys off before their pro days, how many days before, even if I do it at all? Any insight on what you do would help me out tremendously. Usually for my pro day guys, or if I got some guys that are getting ready for a combine, we don't necessarily I guess, like I said, with the linear periodization, we don't necessarily taper to it. We're always ready to go. I like to give them 2 to 3 days off of doing absolutely nothing before they compete. What I've seen in the past is when I've had kids come in here run a 40 yard dash, if I'm expecting them to run a 4.8 and they run a 5.1, that means that they did something the day before. And so I've had it in times where I've had soccer people, lacrosse. I had a little kid one time. I was expecting him to run a 4.9. He came in and ran like a 5.2, 5.25, somewhere in that range. And I said, what the hell did you do? He said, well, I was out in my yard practicing my 40. And I said, well, don't do anything. This was Tuesday. I said, don't do anything tomorrow. We'll come back Thursday and retest and see what happens. Well, he didn't do anything Wednesday, came back and retested, and it ended up getting a 4.9. And so that got me scratching my head and thinking about all these other athletes. And so I really started I monitor the 40-yard dash so much every month, and I've done it for the last 11, 12 years. I didn't really test the 40 in my first couple of years of business. But after 11 to 12 years of constantly timing 40-yard dashes at the end of each month, and you can usually get a 1/10 of a second off an athlete per month. I am trying to figure out what's going on. So after that kid told me that, and then I had this soccer person that had been with me for a while, and I noticed that their 40-yard dash was not good at the end of the month. I was like, well, you were consistent and all this happened. Well, Jared, we had practice yesterday. I said, oh shit. And then I had some baseball players, and over time, after hearing athletes say and do that, I could see that, and if I give them a day or two off, their performance is better. Now, like when I trained Lasky for his pro day, he went from a 217-pound body weight to 235 pounds. He went from moving 1.42 times his body weight to moving 1.72 times his body weight at 0.6 meters per second. So his weight went up, but his relative strength speed also improved. So he went from moving 315 at 0.6 meters per second to moving 405 at 0.6 meters per second. And with that came a difference in which the number is hidden. Although 405 at 0.6 meters per second is cool, it's all about the relative strength number. It was 1.7 times his body weight versus the 1.42 or whatever it was, 1.4 something at 215 or 217 pounds when he started. So what I did is I actually increased his, like I told earlier, the 1.8 times his body weight for this other kid at 0.6 meters per second. I think that's a big key. Once we had that characteristic, then we need to work on other things that's holding them back in the 40-yard dash. It's no longer their strength speed getting up and off the box. So I don't really necessarily plan any tapering for them. I just give them 2 to 3 days off of rest. And I know some of these other highly professional people that had these athletes get ready I've seen them in hotels the night running before. And so that lets me know that these people don't really have a freaking clue what they're doing, but they have the media and the money and the power to publish their stuff to where they can look cool, but absolutely perform nothing. So Conjugate Lab, I hope that helps. I'd recommend giving them 2 to 3 days off. I had Lasky, he went from running a 4.7 to a 4.5. It went from 217 to 235 body weight. He also went from a 32-inch vertical to a 38-inch vertical with those numbers that I just gave. So with all that being said, hopefully I covered some stuff that I wanted to. And we're going to get with Ben and see how that we can integrate some training, dynamic effort, dynamic correspondence into throwing. So welcome, Ben.
What's up, Jared?
I know you had to sit there and listen to me rant on some stuff. I wanted to really cover a lot of information, and I know that I was bouncing all over the place because I didn't really have my shit together, but anyway, what's with baseball?
Jared, you want to recap for all the people who might have not kept up with your, for those who don't know, Jared's Mensa society in terms of what goes on between his ears, but it goes all over the place sometimes. So we're saying it's conjugate training. I think people think conjugate training is just, we do west side, we max effort squat, then we dynamic effort squat, and then I've seen people not get any better doing that, and they just think it's conjugate. And then sometimes they get mad, like think, I don't know, maybe Louis not that smart or something like that. And it's like, well, one, Louis is brilliant. His sport is powerlifting, right? Like that's what his guys do. Their sport is powerlifting. So the way he trains them is sport specific to powerlifting. And then third is the Conjugate is really just a style of training of bringing up all athletic qualities at one time, right? Rather than periodization. The Western periodization is you, let's put it in a metaphor, you do phase A, which takes you into phase B, which takes you into phase C, which takes you into competition. But as you move from phase to phase, you kind of lose qualities that you gained in the previous phase, rather than conjugate training, which what we do here is we're bringing up all qualities at the same time. So we're really able to perform at all times.
At a high level.
Yeah.
So being that we're bringing up all strength levels at the same time, we don't lose different characteristics of the other things.
Right. So like what we're doing is we're hitting maximal our maximal effort method isn't a quote unquote maximal effort day. We are maximally effort squatting or benching. We're hitting the dynamic effort through, I mean, like you said, the speed squat with accommodating resistance through bands and chains really is specific to powerlifting, and their sport is to squat. And here we're training athletes to perform on the field. So we need it to translate directly to the field. So through that, we're hitting the dynamic effort via jumping.
Yeah,
Jumping with resistance.
Yeah, because jumping also is more dynamic than speed squatting, because we don't have to learn how to get out of the bottom of the hole quicker, because we're not squatting in squat suits.
Right.
So like you got to think when people talk, and a lot of times when y'all hear me talk, it's always going to be in context of athletic performance. So with speed squatting, we don't have to speed squat because we don't squat with briefs or suit on, so we don't have to outrun those briefs or that suit before that gear stops.
Yeah, it loses its ability.
And so a lot of this stuff that you hear Louis and Westside talk about, it actually comes from these Russian manuals. I have one here. It's called Managing the Training of Weightlifters. And so, and if you look in that book, it says Methods of Strength Development. Maximum effort method. This is the basic method for developing absolute strength. It's essential. It's consisting of overcoming maximum resistance with a limit weight. So this is a powerful, effective, physiological irritant. This maximum effort method educates one to mobilize volatile effort and skill from maximum tension to relaxation. This maximum effort method increases strength without significantly increasing muscular mass. This is very important for weightlifting, where the athlete is required to keep his body weight within a certain weight limit. So the maximum effort method is very volatile irritant that will increase maximum strength. So what it does, it improves intermuscular and intramuscular coordination. So now we're getting the muscles within the muscle cells themselves. So like if we were talking about the pecs, if you were benching, or you would get all the muscle cells within the pecs to bench. But not only that, that's intramuscular coordination, where we're getting all the muscles helping the pecs, the triceps, the delts, the lats, and all that will help with the bench. So now we're coordinating all the intramuscular and intermuscular to produce a volatile maximum effort, which is very critical in getting off the ball if you're playing football, or that quick first step in soccer or lacrosse, or wherever you may need it. And you're also, like for wrestling, if I can make these wrestlers super strong by utilizing the maximum effort method, we're able to keep them within their weight class of their sport. That's the key about the powerlifting. So we're able to get, I had a kid squat 501 at 161. You know, if I'm increasing too much muscular mass at the same time, I'm not gonna be able to keep them in that weight class. And if I need an athlete to perform on the field, I need to be able to increase his absolute strength, little increase in body mass, so that now we're increasing our relative strength. And once we get our relative strength to a certain level, then we can go up from there. And experience shows that training with 90 to 100% of maximum results, the highest increases in strength. The weight should be lifted between 1 to 2 times per set. So we even go up to like I said, 3s and 5s, but Louis and them will go higher. I mean, usually stay at 1. So the first method in development of strength is the maximum effort method. Then we have the repeated effort method. It has a positive and negative points. It's necessary to take both into consideration for strength development. Working to fatigue, which is not advantageous from energy standpoint, since it requires a large load of volume. So like you've heard me on other podcasts where I talk about muscles fatigue in a sequential order. So with a maximum effort method, all muscle fibers are fired at optimal discharge frequency all at once for that single volatile maximum effort movement. Now the repeated effort method, the reason you'll see these people like, if you heard the linear periodization, they'll go through a hypertrophy phase where they're squatting anywhere between 8 and 15 reps. So I had a kid once say, Jared, we got back to school, we had 5 sets of 12. I said, that's freaking retarded, because they don't know what the hell's going on. So that how you have a collegiate strength coach and you're doing 12 reps on squat, and then they're going to go through these different phases. So that lets me know that I know that the education was not processed right by that person, but it's not necessarily that person's fault, because the person only knows what he knows. You don't know what he don't know, because we're not taught this crap in school. I learned all this stuff and was directed to these books through Louis. So this book right here, Managing the Training of Weightlifters, covers methods of strength development, maximum effort method, repeated effort method, and the dynamic effort method. And not only that, you also have Science of Sports Training by Thomas Kurtz, and it goes in there. You got maximum effort method, repeated effort method, maximum effort method, and Science of Sports Training, overcoming maximal and submaximal resistances that causes maximum or near maximum muscular tension. Okay, then repeated effort method, according to them, overcoming considerably less than maximum resistance that causes considerably less than maximum muscular tension until fatigue forces muscular tension to reach its maximum. And so what I just read was the muscle does not reach its maximum until it's in a fatigue state. That's why in this Managing the Training of Weightlifters, it has its positive and negative points, because you're working to fatigue. So if you're firing your muscle fibers in a sequential order, you got your slow twitch, you got your intermediate, then you got your fast. But your fast twitch are fired at maximum when you're reaching maximum repetition. So like if you're doing a set of 10, those maximum, the biggest fibers are fired last. So that means that fast twitch fibers only fatigued in a fatigue state at the end. So you'd have to reach a max rep of 10 in order to get everything fired at once, versus the brief maximum tension or the maximum effort method. The tension and the weight and the load is so high that all fibers have to fire at once in order to get the job done. So then the dynamic effort method, according to the Science of Sports Training, overcoming less than maximum resistance at maximum speed. That would be our jumping, okay? And not only that, you also have Super Training, which is one of my favorite books, and it goes over the different methods there as well. So for explosive strength, you got maximum strength, and you got speed strength, which are all parts of the context of the different levels of strength development, which is maximum effort, repeated effort method, and dynamic effort method. They're all kind of said in a different fashion, but I think that's to help people understand after they've learned over time. But the bad thing about that is, in those different things, we were never taught this in school. I have a degree in exercise science, and in a lot of those books, you're still taught the linear Western periodization and not raising these different strength levels. But I think a lot of people get so confused with Westside being so popular. They popularized conjugate training within their powerlifting realm themselves. But most people, when you talk to Louis, he wants to find out how you're integrating conjugate training within what your system is. My system is explosive mechanics. I'm not Westside. How do I use the conjugate system? I use it through my speed stuff is dumbbell jumps. My speed stuff is hurdle jumps. It could be seated box jumps. It could be some type of explosive volatile movement. And I save my squatting for increasing my squat strength. And when I work on other things to increase my rate of force development, then I use other exercises, whether it be banded pull throughs, leg curls, Nordics, or anything else as a repeated effort method to bring up those weaknesses. So if my hamstrings are weak, they're more likely going to get injured. So I'll bring up that strength in order to help my squat so that my squat will continue to increase while I'm using these other exercises to continue to help my squat. I'm also utilizing jumps to help work on my rate of force development. What I want to talk to Ben today about is how to use the dynamic effort method for sports. And so he was talking to me about that the other day. Hey, he was talking about the twitch factor of his chest, and I don't think it's necessarily what he needs. I think he needs to have an exercise that's dynamic correspondence of exercise. How can we relate the exercise in order to specifically help that sporting action? And now Ben's more advanced than a lot of other people, so you wouldn't take a novice. I wouldn't take a little kid, maybe that's 12 years old, that's never trained, and have him do some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. Ben's already played or still in collegiate baseball. Throws what, 99? What's your speed?
90, I've been up to 97.
97? Yeah, so.
I mean, lifted here since, have 7 years, 8 years? 8 years of probably legitimate training experience. Benched mid 300 pounds.
So, but now we're just now getting into sport.
Now we're just now getting, getting into how do we do something more specific to the sport. Like you said earlier, like too many people, that was probably one of the best things I heard you say in a while. It's like too many people think training should be, or we should have sport specific training versus the training is specific to sports. Like why is it a coincidence that the best athletes are usually the best athletes in all different sports? Like you got whoever's probably your best football player, receiver, running back is probably going to be really athletic on the basketball court too. They're probably going to be really good at running track. Like that training a really good human being. We're all human beings. We're all athletes.
We all adapt to whatever's imposed upon us. So we can all change. And I didn't realize this until you grow up with this stupid stigma that you're fast or you're not.
Right.
You either jump or you don't.
Yeah, you jump or you're not.
Well, when I've seen
when I came in with a 22-inch vertical, I didn't think I could jump.
Yeah, and what's your highest? 38?
39.
39?
39, 4 something, almost to 40.
Yeah.
Without ever even really specializing in any jump stuff.
And then this past year, I had 2 kids go from 30 to 40 inches in the vertical real quick.
Yeah.
Probably the fast, and they're getting quicker and quicker, but I think it's related to how I have them box squatting. We do box squat. Now, I do have some people regular squat, and I do have some people, what me and Ben call, we bob squat. We just develop different things at different levels of athletes at different times. It's not always, everybody's always box squatting, or everybody's always bob squatting. If you come in here and look at training, it's organized chaos, and it's sometimes with my chaos in my brain versus chaos in the gym, geez, I'm ready to damn leave. But Ben laughs because he sees it. And he says, Jared, what the hell's wrong with you today? But want to get into how can we, the dynamic correspondent thing for throwing is throwing a damn object, whether it be a foot,
right. Throwing is throwing. It's still a human movement. Whether you're throwing a 5-ounce baseball, a 1.5-pound football, a 800-gram javelin, a shot put, discus, they're all throwing, right? So this is almost a specific example of let's talk through how do you maybe apply the conjugate method as a whole, but specifically how do you take if we have the maximal strength already to perform, let's say the maximal strength is how much gas a tank can hold. So we improve the maximal strength, the gas tank gets bigger. We use the repetition method to make sure that there's no cracks in the gas tank and we're not leaking anything through a certain weak spot, or we're improving our ability to stay healthy. The last part is that dynamic effort piece, and that's really how much gas do we put in the tank. Right?
Yeah, it's the dynamic effort method and the maximum effort method. The dynamic effort method, when you got your maximum power output potential.
Right.
Then, so as the tank example, then our dynamic effort method, how much we put into it.
Mm-hmm. how much can you express on the field as an athlete.
And you called it right with the repeated effort method. That fills in any holes. So the stronger you get, the more power and potential that you're able to come out with a dynamic effort method.
Right.
But then we use the repeated effort method to strengthen weak points in single joint exercises to make sure that we don't have any faults in our
right. You got a sprinter that can't do one Nordic hamstring curl, and they're sprinting they're running a 4.6 on laser. You better make sure that they get some stronger hamstrings, or that thing's gonna pull.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a good metaphor for it. But I think specifically when people think about in sport and sports specific power, quote unquote, they want to do what? They want to do ladder drills, or they want to do speed drills, or they want to do throwing wise, I don't know, they want to just do some random rotator cuff stuff versus actually let's teach the body how to be explosive at its maximal explosiveness, I guess. Like that's what the dynamic effort is. It is maximal explosiveness.
Yes, because
it's still maximal.
It's a maximum effort method, but in a different terms.
It's just as fast as your body can move. Like a sprint, a jump, you're not moving any faster than that.
Yeah.
But it's still maximal intensity. So for throwing here, I guess we're trying to dig into how do you really train that outside of just throwing, because you can only throw the shoulder and elbow can only take so much specific high intensity throwing per week. Is there any other way we can manipulate the nervous system via training to, I guess, add on to that, to supplement
that speed? And what we're trying to get at would be something like this. I'm going to read you something out of Super Training. And sometimes people will talk about strength, like I'll get these questions. Oh, my strength. Like I saw this other dumbass on Instagram the other day. You saw that where the guy said, you get faster at sprinting without getting stronger. You don't need squats to get faster. Well, where you got here, Science of Sports Training on page 29, I believe. Let's see if I'm right. Yep, 29. Squats are considered sport-specific for sprinters because they directly contribute to the improved sprinting performance. So, and in super training, it talks about sprinters may be roughly equal in relative strength. However, if one of them runs 100 meters in 12.1 seconds and the other one runs the 100 meters in 12.4 seconds, the reason for this is the difference in speed qualities of the muscles is characterized by their ability to develop maximum working force quickly. So, in the time that it's displayed. So that person, if they're relative equal in body weight, so if me and Ben both squatted 1.7 times our body weight at 0.6 meters per second, we should roughly run about the same thing in a 40. But now, if Ben, but my absolute strength relative to me could be, if Ben squats 2.1 and I squat 2.1, but he's able to move 80% of his max at 0.6 meters, I'm able to move mine at 0.5 meters. That's the difference in our sprint performance.
Right.
And so we're trying to figure out if someone has equal level of upper body strength, whether it be forearm or flexors or whatever, how do we